We spend a lot of time talking about who to draft in fantasy football, but never who to avoid. So today we're going through ADP to find the worst pick in every round of 2025 fantasy football drafts. Then I'll let you know who to draft in those rounds instead. Now, it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, that this is at cost. I'm not avoiding these players altogether. They're just going too high in drafts relative to where they should be. I'll give you a few guys I'm avoiding regardless of cost at the end of the video. But let's start in round one, where Christian McCaffrey is the guy I'm fading. Christian McCaffrey is the ultimate high upside, low floor play in the early rounds of 2025 drafts. We know the ceiling. The last time we got a healthy Christian McCaffrey, he was RB2 in fantasy points per game in 2022, RB1 in 2023. He combined for 152 receptions over those two seasons with more than 3,900 total yards and 34 touchdowns. However, a lot has changed since then. He's now 29 years old and coming off a multi-injury season that held him to just 4 games in 2024. He missed the early portion of the season with Achilles tendonitis in both legs. Not only that, when he did play, Christian McCaffrey was just not the same guy. He averaged just 12 fantasy points per game, which was a career low. He was inefficient, not explosive. Then he got injured again in week 13 with a PCL injury that cost him the rest of the season. Now, Christian McCaffrey has looked healthy in training camp. We can't debate that, and I have moved him up the rankings because of it. However, he does remain one of the biggest risks in fantasy football this year with an ADP in the first round. We've acknowledged the upside, but the first 4 or 5 rounds of fantasy drafts, especially round one, it's just not for taking these home run swings. Of course, we want players with upside, but you don't want to burn that first round pick with a guy who might play 4 games. You could absolutely tank your season by whiffing on a guy that early. Now, I don't think you win your leagues in the early rounds, but you sure as hell can lose it. And that's why I refuse to take a guy with such an unstable floor as Christian McCaffrey has this year. Let me know how it went for you if you drafted him at 101 in 2024. And of course, anyone can get injured, but Christian McCaffrey is particularly vulnerable given his injury history, his career workload, and his age. Like I said before, he's 29. He's had more than 1,800 career touches, and he's played less than 8 games in 3 of the last 5 years. Eventually, these injuries are going to stack up to the point where he's just not the same player he used to be. And who's to say the 49ers aren't going to put a cap on his workload in an effort to keep him healthy for a full season and get him to the playoffs? Plain and simple. There's a real chance we never see that 2022-2023 version of Christian McCaffrey ever again. And because of that, more than anything, you cannot draft him at his first round ADP. So instead, I'm drafting Ashton Genty. Same stud, all-purpose skill set, much less risk. He's the real deal and a target for us at the 1-2 turn. Or I'm going to draft a wide receiver. Nico Collins, Malik Neighbors, Amon-Ra St. Brown. They all give us a higher floor with the upside to finish top 3 at the position. Moving on to the second round, the worst pick for me in that round is going to be Josh Jacobs. Honestly, it's hard to pick a guy out of this round this year and say he's the worst pick in that round. It's a strong round this year, especially compared to last season. Now, I don't think Josh Jacobs is a horrible pick. There's just too many other guys I want in that ADP range instead of him. I mean, he's going 16 overall in Yahoo half PPR. I can't do that. And yeah, Josh Jacobs was really good last year. He had volume, efficiency, got a bunch of red zone work. The floor is definitely high, and he should give you consistent production. But I think we can expect some regression from him after a career-high 16 touchdowns in 2024. And without those touchdowns, it just feels like there's not that ceiling I would want from a second-round running back. So instead, I'm drafting Chase Brown. Now, he has that upside. He's an all-purpose bell cow running back in one of the league's best offenses. He catches passes, scores touchdowns, and he has that backfield to himself. One of my number 1 targets in all of 2025 fantasy football drafts this year is Chase Brown. I'm also considering someone like Jonathan Taylor. He finished strong in 2024. He'll be a focal point in the Colts offense once again. Or I'm going to draft a wide receiver. Drake London, Brian Thomas Jr., Nico Collins, Ladd McConkey. I have them all ranked ahead of Josh Jacobs. Moving on to round 3, where Tyreek Hill is the worst pick in the round in 2025 fantasy football. The vibes are just so bad in Miami right now, and they're especially bad for Tyreek Hill. This guy was on the verge of quitting the team at the end of last season, and I'm still not convinced he'll be on the roster at the end of 2025. And I know the situation was terrible last year, but Tyreek Hill was simply not good himself either. He was wide receiver 32 in fantasy points per game. His yards per reception average dropped from 15.1 in 2023 to 11.8 in 2024. And his target share saw a similar decline, 31.1% in 2023 to 21.7% in 2024. And even if we factor out the non-Tua games, Hill still averaged just 63.1 receiving yards and scored 6 touchdowns in the 11 games that he played with Tua at quarterback. That's a full season pace of just 1,073 yards and 9 touchdowns, far from what we'd expect from a prime Tyreek Hill. Now he's 31 years old and in a completely different Miami offense than what we saw 2-3 years ago when he was dominating alongside Jalen Waddle. The team is doing everything they can to get the ball out of Tua's hands as quickly as possible. And that means a lot more short passes to the running backs and tight ends and less of the downfield stuff to Tyreek Hill. And even when they're not throwing it to the running back or the tight end, it's Jalen Waddle who operates more in that short area, not Tyreek. So I'm really worried that the days of Tyreek Hill as a high-end fantasy producer are done. He's going to be wildly inconsistent week to week. He'll be a major headache trying to figure out which weeks to put him in your lineup. I'm going to quit Tyreek Hill before he quits the Dolphins. So instead, I am drafting Ladd McConkey, second-year stud who should have a massive target share in 2025, or Garrett Wilson. This could be the year he finally cracks the top 12 wide receivers in fantasy points per game. Or I'm going to draft Jalen Waddle 3 or 4 rounds later. Same offense. Could argue he's a bigger beneficiary of the Jonnu Smith trade, just given the area of the field in which he plays. And we can say the same thing about Jalen Waddle's fit with Tua versus Tyreek Hill's fit with Tua. And Waddle had some big seasons to begin his career. If I'm taking a wide receiver from that offense, I'll take the discount on Jalen Waddle. In the 4th round, the worst pick you could make this year is Breece Hall. I love Breece Hall, the talent. He's explosive, he's dynamic in the receiving game, and he's got the size and skill set to be a bell cow. However, the Jets don't seem to view him that way. All offseason, Jets coaches have said they're going to deploy a committee approach to their backfield, and we're not talking a 2-man committee. This is going to be Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, and Isaiah Davis. Allen and Davis both flashed as rookies and have already been mixing in quite often with the first-team offense in training camp. And then we saw in preseason game 1. On the lone drive with Justin Fields and the starters, Breece Hall played 5 of 10 snaps, Isaiah Davis played 3, and Braylon Allen played 2. That's obviously a tiny sample, but it aligns with everything the coaches have said all offseason. A 50% snap share is not going to cut it for Breece Hall. Even more concerning is that 2 of Isaiah Davis's 3 snaps were on 3rd downs. That tells me Isaiah Davis is in line to play somewhat of a significant role on passing downs. And that destroys the whole case that anyone drafting Breece Hall in round 3 or round 4 is trying to make for him. The whole case is that Breece Hall is going to have a huge target share, catch a bunch of passes, and that's how he can make up for the lack of touchdowns in a below-average Jets offense. But if Isaiah Davis is getting a bunch of those targets, and then we factor in that Justin Fields is going to run the ball a ton, which naturally takes pass attempts out of the offense, especially when we're talking about check down passes to running backs, I just don't see how Breece Hall is going to catch the amount of passes he's going to need to live up to that ADP. How I see this shaking out is Breece Hall as a starter, but he's in a heavy rotation with Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, with Isaiah Davis stealing a good portion of the passing game work, or at least enough of it to impact Breece Hall's production and ceiling. Now, he can be usable in fantasy football. He's a good player with a fun skill set, but any hopes of Breece Hall being the bell cow and being able to outplay his ADP, probably not going to happen. So instead, I'm drafting Omari and Hampton. He's a stud rookie running back with an all-purpose skill set. He should be a 3rd rounder, not a 4th rounder. Or I'm going to draft Teteroa McMillan, and I know his ADP on a lot of platforms is multiple rounds below the 4th, but I'm so confident in what he's going to do this year, I'm willing to reach on him. He's another stud rookie. He's going to command a high volume targets right out the gate. He's everything Bryce Young needs. Ted McMillan is going to give us a light version of what we got from Malik Neighbors last year. So I'm happy to reach multiple rounds ahead of ADP to take Ted McMillan. I would draft him over Breece Hall for sure. Now, the worst pick in round 5 this year is Zay Flowers. Don't get me wrong, I love Zay Flowers. Same thing I said about Breece Hall. Love these players. Hate the ADP, hate their situation. Put Zay Flowers in almost any other offense, and he's on my targets list. He's the guy I'm targeting in 2025 fantasy football drafts. But his ceiling is naturally capped by being in that Ravens offense. This is the Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry-centric offense. Flowers can have a 25+% target share and still struggle to keep up with the better wide receivers in fantasy football. And the proof is already there. Zay Flowers has failed to crack the top 30 wide receivers on a points per game basis in either of his first 2 seasons, and he's maxed out at a 12.9 fantasy points per game average. That's just not enough for a guy that we're drafting as the wide receiver 25 at ADP right now. But it's not just Flowers either. No Ravens wide receiver has reached 15 fantasy points per game since Lamar Jackson took over at quarterback. It's a great offense, and Flowers is excellent. But there are too many good weapons in Baltimore and not enough passes to go around. So instead, I'm drafting someone like Courtland Sutton, the clear wide receiver 1 for Bo Nix in Denver. He just got paid, still underrated. He's a far better bet in fantasy than Zay Flowers. Or I'm going to take RJ Harvey. RJ Harvey could be a second half league winner in fantasy football. He'll have to deal with some J.K. Dobbins bullshit early in the season, but I bet he takes over by week 8, wins people championships. He's going to catch passes. He's going to break off long runs. He's going to win titles. Or we could go right back to Teteroa McMillan, who I talked about in round 4. Now, the next one's probably going to get me the most hate, at least maybe outside of Christian McCaffrey. But the worst pick in round 6 this year is Travis Hunter. But I want to preface again that I like Travis Hunter. He's such a unique player. This is about cost. It's about opportunity. Now, the Jaguars said after the draft that while he will play on both sides of the football, Travis Hunter will focus primarily on offense. And that's great news. However, his ADP in seasonal leagues has just been steamed up too much. It just doesn't make sense to draft him where he's going. He's not the number 1 wide receiver in his own offense. Brian Thomas Jr. is the alpha wide receiver in Jacksonville. And this isn't a T. Higgins situation where he's the number 2 in a Joe Burrow offense. This is still Trevor Lawrence that we're talking about here. Let's look at it this way. Travis Hunter is a really good wide receiver prospect. There's no denying that. I comped him to Garrett Wilson during the pre-draft process. He's so smooth, athletic, and his ball skills are absolutely incredible. But he's a rookie. He's going to be behind Brian Thomas Jr. in opportunities. He has a league average quarterback at best. And not only is he a rookie, he's going to play both sides of the football, something we have never seen in the modern NFL. And then what does primarily on offense even look like? Because I've seen some highlights of Travis Hunter practicing on the defensive side of the ball, and he has looked quite impressive. They're going to want to play him over there. Are we talking 60% of the snaps on offense, 70%? He's not going to play a full slate of snaps on offense and be playing on defense, especially not as a rookie. I know he can do it. I know he did it in college, but this is the NFL. I mean, it's already tough enough to learn the NFL game, learn an NFL playbook, get used to NFL work ethic, practice routine. I mean, even NFL speed, never mind having to juggle, also learning a defensive playbook, getting practice reps in on defense, defensive meetings, defensive film, everything that goes into preparing for NFL games on both sides of the football. This is not college where you can just go to the defensive meetings and then just jump into the huddle on offense without having been with that unit all week long leading up to the game. And yes, that's what was happening at Colorado. It just seems impossible to expect this guy to come in and be this high-level producer as a wide receiver for fantasy purposes as a rookie. And what is his ceiling really? As long as Brian Thomas Jr. is in the picture, Travis Hunter's ceiling is going to be at least somewhat capped. He's not going to be some league-winning wide receiver in this environment. It can't happen, especially when you have Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. You want to give me Matthew Stafford or Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, Joe Burrow as his quarterback, you could talk me into it. You could make me believe that we could have two high-end fantasy producers in that offense. But if we look at it logically and we get rid of the sex appeal, the excitement of Travis Hunter, his ability to play at such a high level on both sides of the ball is just overinflating his value as a fantasy wide receiver. Now that plus his draft capital in the NFL draft, which, let's be honest, he would not have been the number 2 overall pick if he was just a wide receiver. He's been boosted up by the ability to play on both sides of the football, both in NFL value and in fantasy. So does he have that sex appeal? He absolutely does. But is he a logical pick at ADP? Absolutely not. So instead, I'm drafting the guy like the aforementioned Tedderoa McMillan, or I'm going to draft someone like George Pickens. I love Pickens this year. I mean, would you rather be the wide receiver 1 in Pittsburgh or the wide receiver 2 in Dallas? Give me Dallas all day. Pickens could legitimately lead the NFL in receiving touchdowns in 2025. Or I'm going to take Rome Odunze. You already know it. My top pick for breakout wide receiver this year is Rome Odunze. I'll take the bet on Rome Odunze breaking out before Travis Hunter easily. We're getting into the second half of drafts now. Let's look at round 7. The worst pick in the 7th round in 2025 fantasy football drafts is Jerry Jeudy. And I don't care that it's the 7th round. Jerry Jeudy has to be one of the worst picks in all of fantasy football drafts. He has consistently underperformed every single season. And then he finally produces with Jameis Winston in a high-volume passing attack. And suddenly, Jerry Jeudy is someone we want in our starting lineup in fantasy football. Not on my watch. Not on my watch. The Browns led the NFL in pass attempts last year. And Jerry Jeudy didn't do shit until Amari Cooper was traded. Yes, the same Amari Cooper who can't even land a job less than a year later. And then on top of that, Cedric Tillman went out with a concussion, and he missed a big stretch of the season. Jerry Jeudy ran the most routes in the NFL, but the volume masked the inefficiency. He was 54th in yards per route, 40th in yards per target, 30th in yards per team pass attempt, 72nd among wide receivers in fantasy points per target, 32nd in route win rate. That's all according to playerprofiler.com. Now, Jameis Winston is gone. Cedric Tillman is back. And while I do believe Jerry Jeudy will have a healthy target share in that offense, the quarterback play is going to be terrible. The passing volume is going to come way down, even if they're trailing in most games. So I'm going to draft instead. I'm going to draft Calvin Ridley. For the first time ever, I am in on drafting Calvin Ridley in 2025. He got a quarterback upgrade, and the target competition around him is a joke. He should get a ton of volume, and they'll actually be on target this year. Draft Calvin Ridley, or I'm going to take Rome Odunze, who we already talked about, or Chris Olave. We used to have to draft Chris Olave in round 2 or round 3, and I know the quarterback situation sucks, and the lingering concussion risk is still there, but Chris Olave is going to get absolutely peppered with targets in 2025. The risk is baked into his cost here. I'll run to the podium to draft him in round 7. Definitely ahead of Jerry Jeudy. Moving on to round 8, the worst pick in that round is going to be Jared Goff. This is less about Jared Goff and more about the quarterbacks that go around him or after him. He goes in the same round as Kyler Murray and Brock Purdy, and multiple rounds ahead of Justin Fields, Dak Prescott, Drake May, and J.J. McCarthy. But being strictly a pocket passer, Jared Goff is very, very touchdown dependent as far as being able to return value at ADP, never mind exceed it. And it's hard to expect him to approach 40 touchdowns again, given he's in a run-first offense that ran the ball 48% of the time in 2024, that was 6th in the NFL, while only calling 584 pass plays. And Jared Goff doesn't have the ability to make up for it with his legs like the other quarterbacks going around him. I'm not even talking about Kyler Murray or Drake May or Justin Fields. Brock Purdy even ran for over 300 yards last year with 5 rushing touchdowns. That's just not in Jared Goff's range of outcomes at all. In 17 games last year, he ran for a total of 56 yards, and it was 21 in 2023. I just don't like drafting guys that I need to score a bunch of touchdowns, because touchdowns are the least predictable stat, at least among those that we care about for fantasy. How do we know that a bunch of Jared Goff's touchdowns from last year won't end up being Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery scores instead? And I didn't even mention the change of offensive coordinator and how much that could impact things in Detroit as well. So instead, I am going to draft David Njoku. He's my most drafted tight end this year. He's going to get a ton of targets and a bunch of touchdowns. I don't believe in Jerry Jeudy, like we already talked about, or Cedric Tillman for that matter. So I'm in on Njoku regardless of the quarterback situation. Or if I'm looking at quarterback, I'm going to go Justin Fields. I am all in on Justin Fields this year. You're not drafting him to quarterback your real life team. Get over it. This is fantasy football. And in fantasy football, he is the ultimate Konami code quarterback. He averaged 19 fantasy points per game in 2024, which would have been good for QB7 on the season. And prior to that, he was QB9 at fantasy points per game in 2023 and QB5 in 2022. He will win you weeks and possibly your league. Or if Justin Fields isn't your flavor, you could take Brock Purdy. He's one of the safest picks you could make at quarterback this year, and the cost to get him is more than reasonable. And we know the upside to get into that top 6, even push the top 5 is there because he's already done it. Or, and what I really like to do is wait a couple more rounds on quarterback and take someone like Drake May, Dak Prescott, or J.J. McCarthy. Moving on to the 9th round, where the worst pick in round 9 is Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams is the favorite to lead the Cowboys backfield, but that doesn't mean you should be taking him in the single-digit rounds of fantasy football drafts. Too many fantasy gamers, and even fantasy analysts for that matter, are clinging on to what once was with Javonte Williams. He was a really good prospect coming out of North Carolina, and he gave us some good stuff early in his NFL career. But over the last 2 or 3 seasons, it just hasn't been good. It seems like he never fully recovered from that knee injury, despite being given all the chances in the world to be the guy there in Denver. I mean, he never averaged more than 12 fantasy points per game in a single season. And according to Fantasy Pros, Javonte Williams didn't force a single missed tackle from week 8 onward last season. This is a guy who was once a really strong tackle breaker. Now he's going half a season without even breaking one. It's sad, really. But because he's now on the Cowboys and nobody knows the name Jaden Blue or Phil Maffa, and people are even further out on Miles Sanders, Javonte Williams is suddenly being resurrected from the fantasy grave. I just see no way he can maintain a fantasy producing role in the face of a fresh-legged rookie with 4.38 speed in a pass-heavy offense. His only path is he's this year's Jamal Williams, and he just falls into the end zone for 18 touchdowns. I mean, there have been reports from training camp that he's being outplayed by Miles freaking Sanders. And we know how bad Miles Sanders is these days. So instead, I'm considering Justin Fields or Brock Purdy or Ricky Pearsall. There's no Debo, no Ayuk, and Pearsall looked really good at the end of last season. He could wind up being one of the steals of fantasy drafts. Or I'm looking at Josh Downs. Josh Downs is going to get peppered with targets no matter who's at quarterback in Indianapolis this year. He's got volume with some upside. I like grabbing him in the 9th round range. And speaking of steals of the draft, Emeka Egbuka is going to crush his ADP. I really like him around this range as well. The longer Chris Godwin is off the practice field, the more confident I am that Emeka Egbuka is going to break out in a big way. I love drafting him right now. And if I'm drafting a Cowboys running back this year, it's going to be Jaden Blue. He's the only one in that backfield with any juice. He's got far more upside than Javonte or Miles Sanders, and I can get him for multiple rounds after Javonte Williams. And wrapping it up with the 10th round, where Jonnu Smith is the worst pick in round 10 this year. He was a fun breakout in the second half last season, and I'd be on board drafting him around round 10 if he were still in Miami. But it feels like fantasy drafters haven't fully recalibrated after his trade to the Steelers. And we've seen him in this offense before. With Arthur Smith in Atlanta in 2023, Jonnu Smith was the tight end 20 in fantasy points per game with a 13% target share. And prior to that, Arthur Smith was calling plays in Tennessee for 2 seasons with Jonnu Smith as his tight end. And in those 2 years, Jonnu Smith was tight end 16 and tight end 17 in fantasy football. Now in Pittsburgh, the Steelers already have an established tight end in Pat Freiermuth. He'll play that more traditional inline tight end role, while Jonnu Smith will be a hybrid guy who lines up in the slot, at tight end, out wide, even in the backfield. But how many times do we see these hybrid type players actually put up big numbers in fantasy football? Hardly ever. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to save the day at this point in his career either. It's going to remain a run-first offense that plays slow and really limits the ceiling of all of its fantasy-relevant players. So instead of drafting Jonnu Smith in round 10, I'm looking at Emeka Egbuka, Josh Downs if they're still on the board. And if I'm drafting a tight end in this area, I'm looking at Colts rookie Tyler Warren. I know the quarterback situation is sketchy and he's got some legitimate target competition, but it can't be any worse than the environment that Jonnu Smith is stuck in Pittsburgh. And one other guy I'm considering in round 10 is Drake May. He's my favorite breakout quarterback candidate of 2025. New weapons, upgraded offensive line and coaching staff. Plus, he's still so underrated as a runner. He could be a top 5 quarterback this year. I want to wrap it up with this. Just a few more names that I'm fading this year at ADP. James Cook, Marvin Harrison Jr., DJ Moore, David Montgomery, Jalen Warren. Now, off my board entirely, regardless of cost, Joe Mixon. He's had that foot injury that's been lingering since OTAs, hasn't practiced, no timeline for a return, not drafting him at all. Same thing with Quinshon Judkins. He's still not even signed his rookie contract. He's been away from the team all summer dealing with off-field issues. I'm kind of worried this is going to be a Darius Geis situation. We just never hear from this guy again. I'm also completely taking off my board Brandon Ayuk. He's been really slow in his recovery from last year's knee injury, and now Kyle Shanahan has speculated that we won't see him until at least week 6. And he mentioned it could be as late as week 10. And anytime I hear a timeline like that, I add multiple weeks to it, which means we're not getting Brandon Ayuk until somewhere between weeks 8, week 12, if at all. And same thing with Chris Godwin. He hasn't practiced all offseason or training camp. And there were reports that he had a second procedure over the offseason. He clearly had a setback with his ankle injury. So who knows when we'll see him on the field at all. Can't draft him. But let me know in the comments, who are you avoiding in fantasy drafts this summer? And let me know why I'm an idiot for not wanting to draft the guys on my list. And don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll be putting out content like this all summer long. And if you want more from me, you can find my rankings, articles, tools, resources, and so much more at yardsperfantasy.com.